We've got a goodly number of people in the room, so we're just going to get started now. We're only about a minute ahead of ourselves. Got to say hi to everybody, including MH08, who was first on the scene, as well as William Page, Lou T, 1501, Hobie Jackson in Northeast Texas, where it's raining. It rains in Texas? I thought Texas and Southern California never rained. Mark Miller, what's up? Gene Ritchie from Chino Valley, Arizona. DeFin 2007. Is that DeFin as in Finnish American? Emmett, Michigan. It's kind of across there on 69, I think, not far from K-Pac. No, not far from Memphis. Not far from Memphis. Prodigal Stranger, you're watching Lehto's live, and now your host with the most, Steve Lehto. The greatest tagline anybody ever had was Jerry Blavat, who had the Geeter with the heater. We've talked about that before. Sometimes I listen to myself. Greetings, everyone from Prairie Village, Kansas. Sometimes those are the best conversations you have is when you're talking to yourself. What of? Good morning, Mr. Lehto. Padre, hello from beautiful South Georgia. Olaf from Tucson. Ben, checking in from Richmond, Virginia, from an abandoned building. There's probably a story there, I'm assuming. H. Moore in Gilbert, Arizona. Gina Maria Italiano, Columbus, Ohio. DeFin, yes. Okay, we Finns have got to stick together. There's only a few million of us. Nancy McCormick, I'm talking in the whole world, not in Michigan. Nancy McCormick from Oregon, Steve G. in San Diego, go figure. Chris Garvey, good afternoon from Lynchburg, Virginia. Norman, Oklahoma for Joel Kirschman. Good morning, Steve, all the way from Washington State, 411 now. What's the 411 now? Piper John, greetings from Florida. Hello, Steve, and everyone from Southeast Michigan. Sarah C. And Graham Pauly checking in from Sydney, Australia, one of our regulars from Australia. Appreciate that. Grayson Wagner asks a question: if one of your vehicles was a lemon, would you pursue the issue yourself? And interestingly, I've actually done that only because it worked out so easily for me. But generally speaking, if I have a legal problem, I hire an attorney. Many of you first saw my channel when I did the Crazy Town series about that frivolous lawsuit that attorney filed against me on behalf of a crazy person. And I hired an attorney who said, here, deal with this. I don't want to deal with this. And but in my case, I had a defective Dodge. It's the little IROC RT things they built back in the late 80s, early 90s. And I had one that had dual overhead cam, and it had a bad timing belt, and it kept going bad. And it wasn't the timing belt. I later found out what the problem was, but I bought it used. But I knew the guy from Chrysler so well. I called him up one day and said, hey, I've got a defective Chrysler, and it doesn't qualify under the lemon law. However, it is such a severe problem that I would file a lawsuit, but I think you're going to agree with me that you should just settle it. And he goes, send me the repair orders. And I sent him to him, and he called me back, and he goes, yeah, we'll take care of this. And we settled it. So now, interestingly, he did not have to pay attorney fees because I can't really claim attorney fees working on my own behalf. And that's something a judge probably would not have agreed with anyways, but I hadn't filed a lawsuit. So there was no filing fee and very little work. All I did was make a phone call and send a fax. But if I had a legitimate lemon where I couldn't get anybody to work with me and I'm stuck with this thing, yeah, I call up one of my friends and go, hey, guess what? You're representing me now. Thank you for the question. Eileen Stogdell. Hi, Sherry Austin, Texas. Hi. Okay. Good morning, Steve, from the NEK, the Flatlander. Sunshine Productions, 6 degrees and hello from Boston. Now, I did have to stop there for a second. I clicked over to live chat from top mode, whatever that is. So now I'm kind of out. But Terrell Cochran, hello from Northern Michigan. Is that Northern Lower Peninsula, or are you in the Upper Peninsula? It's a fine distinction that only people in Michigan care about. Burke's Law, Eaton Rapids, Michigan. Love that area. Dennis Berman, love you, Steve. Love you, Dennis. Alan Brown says there's no bears in Scappoose today. Are you sure there? But are there guys lurking around in bear suits? Keep them out of your cars. What's sad about that is it's such a stupid thing to do and to get caught. And the fact that they got away with it at first, because I think the allegations they did it 3 times. Cyberdoc says if you dress as a bear, you can pass as an attorney. Okay. I'm not sure how many bears practice law. Ron Howell says Detroit versus Kansas City in the Super Bowl. Your thoughts? Well, here's the deal. I rip on Detroit all the time because I grew up in Detroit. And you have to understand, the Red Wings have won the Stanley Cup during my lifetime. The Pistons have won the national championship in my lifetime. The Tigers have won the World Series in my lifetime. And the Lions have just been sliding along at the bottom, doing the least they can possibly do. And every now and then they do well. And then this past year, they did pretty well. And I'm one of these people who's like, I believe it when I see it. But you know something? If they made it in the Super Bowl, I'd end up eating a lot of crow, as they say. But I'd say, okay, fine, I believe you now. You did it once, but actually, that would be nice if they even got there. Oh, Lewis Browning, how funny is the Onion story? This is one that might get emotional for some people, but you may have heard that Alex Jones has a website called Infowars. At least he had it until recently because he lost it in bankruptcy, and the buyer was the Onion, the news, the comedic satirical news outlet. And then they're still fighting over it now because there's some people are arguing about whether or not the auction was fair. And so a court will resolve it. But last we heard, at least, a court had said, yes, the Onion now owns Infowars. And so that would be an ironic thing. But I pointed out that the Onion, for instance, along with the Babylon Bee, they both filed amicus briefs in the Supreme Court. And they both did them in a joking manner, which were extremely funny. I thought the Onions was a little funnier, but hey, if it's funny, it's funny, okay? And so I like the Onion. I used to subscribe to it when it was a newspaper, when it was actually paper form, and I used to actually have it delivered to my office. And you know, it came in the mail. It wasn't like a newspaper boy came by with the Onion's here. But I remember getting it, and it was in their golden era. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, go check them out. The Onion. A lot of their stories do get repeated by people who don't get the joke. And sometimes they border on the questionable taste. But one of my favorite ones is the headline. It goes, Christ returns to the NBA. And they had a picture done quite well by an artist of Jesus dunking a basketball. And they had a whole story about him as if he was an NBA player who left and come back. So it was you can see not everyone will find it funny, but Mark Miller says bet against the Lions in the Super Bowl. That way you'll be happy regardless. No, I'd actually root for them there in the Super Bowl. I'd root for them. I'm. It's not that I'm rooting against them. I'm just disappointed in them. Okay, I don't dislike you. I'm just disappointed in you. Okay, so that's the thing. Steve, not me, says Alex Jones got it back. Did it happen in the last few minutes? Because I know that his people had filed a request a hearing on it, but we'll see what happens. Padre says if a person has multiple personality disorder and two or more of the personalities agree to a crime, can the person be charged with a conspiracy? And of course, the short answer to that is no. But because they're a person. Legally, they're a person. Your definition and your being of personhood is not how many personalities you have. It's you're a person. Like your thumbprint was found there, you're guilty. No, my other personality is guilty. No. But I did see a case, and I think it was in Australia, where they actually let someone with multiple personalities testify as different personalities. And that, of course, is something I would think is quite contentious, and I'm not sure I'm willing to buy that just yet. But Joel Kirschman says the Onion still does a monthly print newspaper. I should check that out. I should support them because why not? Why not support a print medium that's completely dying? Oh boy. Joel Sibsky, kind of like the Vikings. Yeah, I've had other people say, but Steve, what about Green Bay? And there are other teams that have had similarly long skids of unhappiness, I guess we'd call it. But I can only speak to the Lions. And it's kind of funny because working in radio as long as I did, I worked at stations that carried the Lions games. I remember listening to the Lions because I was forced to, just sitting there and running the board and plugging in the commercials and stuff and just listening, going, couldn't we carry somebody more entertaining? Because they're losing again. Somebody asked, how's the knee? Oh, S. Thompson. Yeah, I smashed my knee. And I posted a photograph of it on Facebook, and I mentioned it in my other channel on Friday, which I guess was day before yesterday. Today's Sunday, right? They all blend together after a while. And my knee is fine, but man, I was in pain for about a 60-second window. I was in so much pain. I literally, I was riding an ATV on my property, hauling some stuff around, and I went to step out of it, and I whacked my knee on this metal tab that just sticks out specifically to make you whack your knee. And I whacked my knee so hard that I actually doubled over in pain, and I leaned on the bed of the ATV, and I was actually thinking, like, I'm not going to black out, am I? And I didn't, and eventually the sensation returned to my leg. But when I looked at it, it had blood running down. It was gross. So I took a picture of it because why not? And I'm fine now. I'm fine now. But boy, I was in a lot of pain when that happened. And by the way, for those of you who don't follow my other channel, I did go see Jay Leno again on Thursday night. He was playing at the Flint Capitol Theater, which is in southeastern Michigan. It's in Flint, Michigan. And I worked in Flint for a while. In fact, I discovered Thursday night that a building I used to work in, I knew they'd torn it down, but a building I used to work in was right around the corner from the Capitol Theater. And now it's just a vacant lot with grass on it. It's always kind of weird, you know, when you go back and look and go, wait, what? There was a tower here before. It's not there anymore. But anyways, here is my all access pass to the Jay Leno extravaganza at the Capitol Theater on November 14th. And they did, in fact, circle AA. And that's not a reference to a meeting I was required to attend. That's a reference to, I believe, all access. So got to hang out with him. My brother was there, and some other people from Williams International were there, and including a bunch of guys who helped with Jay's car, getting the car back on the road. And so I'll find you a picture here. And there's a bunch of us there, and I'm standing there in the red. But I know it doesn't come out real well there, but I did post it on my other channel. So if you're curious about that, go to my second channel, which used to be called The Vault, now it's called Second Channel. And I talked about that and my knee getting whacked and so on. And by the way, I actually did get an extremely angry message from somebody who said, Steve, you put up this video where you're just talking about stuff. Why did you do that? You could be talking about more important things. And then he goes, like RV frames. And the guy was serious. I'm like, wait, if you want me to talk about something, why don't you just ask me to talk about it instead of calling me an idiot for not talking about it? I did not know that RV frames were something that so many people were freaking out about, that they needed me to drop everything and talk about them. So why do they call it a funny bone? There's nothing funny about it, Doug Jones. I think it's a funny bone because you whack it and the reaction is so over the top. Graham Pauly, the case of the multiple personality witness is ongoing in Newcastle, NSW, New South Wales. Is it New South Wales? Australia. I apologize. I should know all my abbreviations better than this. But no, I heard about it. I remember seeing that and so on. Oh, the prodigal stranger says funny bone is a play on the technical term, the humorous, and that very well could be too. Oh, laughing with you, not at you, on your knee, Mark. No, that's the thing is like right now I look back on it and I'm like, you know, you look at it now and it's a cut about that long, and it's healing fine. It's healing fine. I put stuff on it and I got it covered and all that. But when you look at the moment I did it and how much pain I was in for the next minute or two, it was just so radically out of proportion. And the fact that it happened is so silly. It's just, you know, that's why. So Ember Miss 69, the painful question I have is, will the Hertz playlist be called the playlist of Hertz? I actually did put together a playlist on that the other day. I'm not sure if it's showing or if I should publish it or something. I don't know what you do with those. But I did put, because I have like something like 20 videos, 25 videos about Hertz now, which is just crazy. Andrew Kruchowski, in the words on Michael Keaton, hey, Steve. Okay. Oh, boy. What of says a federal bankruptcy judge put the Onion's winning bid for Alex Jones's Infowars media platform on pause to further review the bankruptcy auction process. Yes, they paused it. But it's one of those things where it's not like they undid it. And there's a big difference, because they are supposed to have auctions to sell things generally. But the bankruptcy trustee is granted a lot of authority on how to dispose of things. And the bankruptcy trustee is simply supposed to do what they can to get the most recovery they can for something. And so I'm wondering if they would have objected so much if simply somebody else had bought it. But we'll see what happens. But wait and see. I wouldn't say it's all undone though. Steve, I see you can't post on your Facebook page. I see you can't post on your Facebook page. I post my Facebook page all the time. I generally only post the videos and stuff, but I don't post a lot there, but I do post stuff from time to time. Jay Klein says, time to get the Sawzall out and remove that piece of metal. I have a Sawzall, by the way. People go, but is it an actual Sawzall brand? Yes, it's like Kleenex or Kodak. I think the tab is to mount a door, but I don't have doors and I never intend on getting them. I drive this thing in the wintertime with no doors. I see people who've got doors on their side-by-side, and I'm like, I got to open a door now and climb in. Like, I like to be able to climb in one side, climb out the other, and if it were to flip, I just jump out, like. It's not me, 07. Tough for Jay to get gigs lately? Not that I know of. He still performs a lot. The show is sold out. So, I know he was also playing the next night someplace in Pennsylvania. I'm not sure where. I don't think he performs like 7 nights a week or anything, but I'm pretty certain that he performs more than 100 times a year, and I wouldn't be surprised if he performs more than that, but 100 times a year easily, pretty sure. So, it jumped, and I said, "Hey, happy Thanksgiving Star Song, and to you, my friend. I appreciate that. Thanksgiving, of course, is coming up. Is it the 28th? It's an awfully late Thanksgiving, right? But that's how it goes this year, I guess. So, and to you. Padres is Jacksonville 3, Detroit 0. Okay. Mark Miller, did you have a chance to listen to Sailing Ships by Whitesnake? No, I didn't. I'm sorry. We had a long discussion last week about sailing and ocean and lake going songs. Because of it being the at that time the anniversary of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Brian L'Oreal, hi Steve from Hillsdale, Michigan, another beautiful town in Michigan. Oh, it's not me. So this was a Flint joke. Well, What's funny is I saw him previously in Michigan, but I saw him at an Indian casino up in Mount Pleasant. But that was about a year ago. Reinhard, man, Jay needs the money. Well, he's got to keep all those cars running. Oh, boy. Jeff Brown, what's your favorite concert you saw this year? Oh, that's hands down ELO. I talked about that. I said it was my favorite concert I've ever seen. So the Electric Light Orchestra I saw, well, it's Jeff Lynne's Electric Light Orchestra. I had one or two people, oh, Steve, it's not ELO, it's Jeff Lynne's ELO. One of the guys from the original band is not there. It happens after a few decades in business. But it was a fabulous show. Alien EV says, a company here that uses my last name and I don't like it. Is there anything I can do about it? Well, it depends on what your last name is and how they're using it, and if they're using it to benefit off of you or they're simply using it because they have the same last name. So let's suppose your name was Johnson, and you found out there's a company called Johnson Controls. And you're like, I've got nothing to do with them. Why are they using my name? Well, number one, they've been around for a while. Number two, I think there's a guy named Johnson involved. But if somebody opened up a business down the street from me and said, Steve Lehto Law Offices, and you're not an attorney and your name's not Steve Lehto, we might have a problem. Betty Boop, best Thanksgiving story? I don't have any. Thanksgiving was not that big of a deal in my family. I know there's families out there where that's like the big get together. My family's more about Christmas Eve. We did a big Christmas Eve family get together. Thanksgiving was always parents and 6 kids, 8 people around a huge table. Jay Klein, the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, was one of my mom's favorite songs. I can't listen to it without crying. Yeah, there's that, and it's a sad song also on top of that, without the connection to your mother. But Shaban says, "Oh, sad about Jay Leno's wife. Yeah, she's having issues, and he's been appointed to be her guardian. So it's sad that, that happens a lot, but it's not publicized because the people aren't famous. And I think TMZ and some others were all over that, like, oh my gosh, look at this. Chase, greetings from St. Joe, Michigan. St. Joe, of course, is over here. By the way, I had a guy. I think he was serious. He goes, why do you always point at the back of your hand? Everybody I know in Michigan does it with their other hand and says St. Joe's over here, not over here. And because I'm talking to a camera. If I was to go like this, I can't see my hand unless I do this, in which case I don't have to do this. I'd rather just go like this, and plus I'm right-handed. Sorry. People freak out over the littlest stupid things, and it I just decided to laugh at it and move on. So there you go. Star song. I was born in Detroit, grew up in Hillsdale, live in Louisiana now. Nice to talk to people from my old stomping ground. Were you born in Detroit proper or a suburb of Detroit? Because I often tell people I'm from Detroit, but I'm from Birmingham, Michigan. And Birmingham, Michigan has a road running through. It's called 15 Mile or Maple Road. And that's because there's mile roads that go all the way back to Detroit. And of course, the border from Detroit is 8 Mile, made famous by some singer, Eminem. And so, technically, I'm not from Detroit, but the town I lived in was only 7 or 8 miles as a crow flies from the border of Detroit. But it's the largest town nearby. And so that's often the case. You meet somebody who grew up in a suburb of a big town, and they'll say, well, I'm from that town. And as soon as you meet someone else who says it, you go, really, where? And they go, oh, Birmingham. I go, same with me. Oh. What of says, I got to see the wonderful, funny Mr. John Cleese of Monty Python fame last night. He's on tour. John Cleese, last chance to see me before I die. Barely living comedy legend, John Cleese. That's funny. He is hilarious. And what's amazing about him, too, is that he actually did movies as well. And then, of course, television. And the Monty Python guys were among the most creative people who ever came along. It's amazing. Maker Mike is in Quartzsite, Arizona for the next few months. Tigerman 99515, growing up with all those kids, did your mom just throw food in the middle of the table and stand back? Close. There were occasions. Oh, boy. Alan Brown Sr., did you get a chance to listen to Metallica's tribute to Elton John and Bernie Taupin? No, I did not. But I started looking for it and I found something else. And I wound up going around a rabbit hole, wormhole that I wound up someplace else entirely, and I just forgot. I apologize. Are you enjoying the fame of having a YouTube channel, Roasted Garlic? Thank you for asking. It's an interesting question. I do get recognized from time to time. Quite often it's at places where people who are into the same thing that I am will show up. I went to a car show in Troy and I got recognized 12 times. But I've also gone places, as I mentioned before, a couple weekends ago, I was at a funeral and someone came up to me and goes, excuse me, are you Steve Lehto? Everybody's whispering because it's a funeral. And so it's unusual. But most people who recognize me, as far as I can tell, seem to like me and oh my gosh, nice to meet you, So I don't mind. I'd feel, I think, worse if I was somebody else. There's people in the media that might get recognized that people don't like. I wouldn't want to be one of them, which is almost an Alan Parsons song, but not quite. Hello from the Florida Panhandle, running reseller. Have you noticed how many states have got panhandles? Panhandles? I mean, they could call it something else, right? Some other kind of appendage or something, but it's always a panhandle. Tim Noel, are you near the Mackinac Bridge? Not at the moment. No, sir. Mackinac Bridge is up here, or it's up here. Okay. See, I can't even do it. It's up here. Oh. Star Song is born in Gray's Hospital in Detroit. My family lived on Kodiak Island during the earthquake in 1964. After that, we moved back to Michigan. Most of my family still lives in Michigan. Cool. I appreciate that. Chris Badisa, Steve L. What's not to like? You'd be surprised. Shaban says, well, I did enjoy Jimmy Fallon for a time, but either way you feel about the humor today, Jay Leno kind of did make the beginning of the end of late night show popularity. Yeah, and Jimmy Fallon is a different thing. I don't mean that derogatorily. I mean that what Jimmy Fallon does is he does a lot of stuff where he is the center of the comedy. And Jay Leno would come out and do a stand-up opening monologue, and he'd sit down and then he'd interview the guests, but the guests were the focus. And I've seen talk show hosts where it's all about the host, and the host is trying to get the guests to make them look funny. And I'm not saying that about Jimmy Fallon, but Jimmy Fallon's done a lot of very, very creative stuff. But remember, Jimmy Fallon can sing, he can do voices. One of the funniest things that exists on YouTube is Jimmy Fallon singing the song "I Whip My Hair" back and forth as if he was Neil Young. And if you haven't heard it, go listen to it, because he's joined on stage by somebody very famous. It's just, who thinks of this stuff? Michael Atos says, when I started talking to my wife in the Philippines, I told her I was from Lansing, Michigan. She had no idea where it was. So I said, Detroit. And she said, oh, Riot Town. Detroit is famous worldwide. That's sad, because if you're talking about the riots in 67 and 68, I'm purposely using both years because there were riots in many cities in America in that time frame. Detroit was not the only city that had a riot. But I mean, Detroit riots were pretty bad. And I lived, as I just pointed out, 8 miles from the edge of town. And a lot of people left Detroit around that time during those riots. But, it's unfortunate. They also had a problem on Devil's Night with people burning down abandoned homes every single year, to the point where film crews were coming in from other countries to film the burning buildings. And I remember reading an article where they interviewed a Japanese film crew from Japan who said, yeah, we're here to film the burning buildings of Detroit. And Detroit finally got together with volunteers and stuff. They put an end to it. But it's stuff like that. You can try to tell people it's not going to happen anymore. But they're like, no, but I'm pretty sure I heard about it recently. Image Docray, late night died when Letterman retired. Letterman was a whole different thing. Letterman, I know that Johnny Carson loved Letterman, and a lot of people were thinking that Letterman would take over when Johnny Carson retired. And then, of course, Johnny Carson appeared on Letterman several times after he retired. But Letterman was a very, very, almost very, very surreal, some of the things he would do. One of my favorite long-term skits was Lyle the Intern. So if you don't know who Lyle the Intern was, if you're a Letterman fan, you can find a single video on YouTube that contains them all. And they'd be coming back from a break, and Letterman would be reading like who's coming up next and later on this week. And he'd turn and also realize the guy sitting next to him. And it was Lyle the Intern who had just wandered in and sat down during the show. I can't do it justice. Just watch a couple of them. And by the time you're done, you'll be laughing so hard you'll be crying. Fred Hoyt, the burning river in Cleveland. I mentioned burning rivers in Ohio, and I had a guy get really, really angry with me. And he goes, Steve, that never happened. And I said, yeah, it did. What are you talking about? It never happened. He goes, it didn't happen. He goes, they made that up. I go, no. You can go on the internet, type in Burning Rivers, Ohio. You'll find websites put up by people in Ohio, like the government of Ohio, like historical websites that talk about it. Yes, it happened. Might have gotten blown out of proportion. It might have been different than what people thought it was. But I pointed out before, rivers everywhere were catching on fire in the 60s and 70s because we were dumping so much junk in the rivers. The Rouge River in Detroit caught on fire. I mean, I'm not blaming Ohio for burning rivers. I simply mentioned it because it's one of the things that it's the same thing with Devil's Night in Detroit. Okay, it happened. Doesn't happen anymore, but it did happen. So blah, blah, blah liked Craig Ferguson the most. He was good too, but he was on so late. And I when I see clips of him, I'm like, oh my gosh, that guy was funny. But he did some very, very strange things also, like that weird robot he had over there. And I'm not quite sure. I didn't watch him that much, but I know who he is. MH08, I miss Ferguson. M3, 1968, we spent several nights on Selfridge Air Force Base with my brothers. We lived in Detroit. Overkill on my brother's part. We lived near Hamtramck. Hamtramck is an unusual situation. Hamtramck and Highland Park are cities that are surrounded by Detroit. It's the weirdest thing. And I believe that Hamtramck and Highland Park actually touch each other, but they don't touch anything outside of Detroit. And so it's like completely surrounded. So to get out of Hamtramck, you can go to Highland Park or drive through Detroit. And if you're trying to get out of the area, you still have to drive through Detroit. It's just strange how they did that, how these things spread out like that. I've always been fascinated by that. W. Parks says, I live in Ohio. The Cuyahoga River caught fire many times, except for the guy who told me it didn't. He said it's all a hoax. It never happened. Never happened. Doug Jones, Johnny Carson, Karnak, the Magnificent. All I can think of are the dirty ones. I don't want to do them now. Mark Miller, Landlocked. Yes, yes. Although we're not talking about getting to sea, we're talking about just getting out of Detroit. MH08, Glendale, Colorado is surrounded by Denver. Is it really? I never stopped to think about how many other ones like that exist out there. I'm sure there are other ones. But, there you go. So, Andy, New York 29 says Lions lead Jaguars 7-3 in the first. 7-3 in the first. I'll say in the first. I'm not going to say period. I tend to think of them as quarters. Oh, boy. So, Lewis Brown and Craig Kilborn. I'm not as familiar with him. I know who he is. I've seen a few clips of him, but not that many. Jay Klein says there are cities in Cincinnati surrounded by the city of Cincinnati. Norwood is one, home of the GMF body for years. Okay. Maybe it's more common than I thought. I just remember at the time hearing about Hamtramck. I'm like, really? Wow, that's bizarre. So, Valerie Ann says, we don't call it Devil's Night, we call it Goosey Night here. Don't ask me why. Goose, the noun or the verb? So you walk up and you goose somebody with their permission, of course. Jerry Brown, does Los Angeles surround any towns? I don't know. And I also know there's situations where there's a big city that's got like boroughs. And it's almost like, well, they are their own little towns, but they still fall under the jurisdiction of, I don't know. Ed G, do you remember the episode of Johnny Carson where Ed McMahon was drunk? I thought that was every one of them, wasn't it? And Carson said at one point, do you think you're really fooling anybody? And busts out laughing. I mean, was there one where he's particularly drunk? I just always imagine the guy was just drunk. Jay Brown says, hi, Steve. The Onion bought Infowars. We talked about that earlier. There's some issues going on there, but we'll see how that pans out. Doug Jones says, SNL, the early days. I used to tell people jokingly, I'm so old. I remember when SNL was funny. But the thing is that it actually has gotten funnier again more lately. There's a few things I particularly like. I'm going to draw blanks on some of them right now. But I actually like the guys, Colin Jost and the other guy, Shea. Michael Shea, who do the news. I like them. And I also have liked a few of the recurring skits, including that woman who keeps getting abducted by aliens. McKinnon. Funniest thing ever. Jay Klein, Norwood has its own government and police department and schools. Okay. Valerie Ann says it's the only area in the country that calls it Goosey Night. A professor researched and they have no clue how it came about. And that's one of those fascinating things for linguists, people who study linguistics, is where names come from, because sometimes you can't figure it out. And sometimes stories will get passed around that aren't true, and you cannot get people to not accept them as true. And so, I don't want to get into it because it usually causes so much consternation to talk about these, because people have these firmly held beliefs about, where the phrase such and such came from. And you tell them something, no, it didn't. And it's like, calm down. Do you have money invested in this? Like, why would it upset you to find out it has a different origin than you thought? The Prodigal Stranger says, yeah, SNL has been worth watching since 1995. Dude, I'm not... You're willing to concede the 90s? I love Scotch. SNL was good when it started. Lewis Brown and Craig Kilborn hosted before Craig Ferguson. They just went from one Craig to the next? Huh. Jake Lyon says, I'm not Jay Klein. I had a university experiment last Tuesday with a kerosene-powered turbine, 75,000 RPM, exhaust at Mach 1.4, spooling up, gave me chills. What's cool about that is I've seen models of turbines in real life, and also pulse jets fired up. And what happens is when it starts spooling up, there comes to a point where suddenly the process starts working like it's supposed to. And there's a huge jump in how fast it's going and the noise it makes, the sound it makes. And it is really cool. And it's hard to imagine that when you get into a Chrysler turbine car, as I've done now 3 times, and you fire it up, the starter motor engages and spins it up to 20,000 RPM. And then all of a sudden, and it's a smoother operation from, the start is, but it's still one of those things. It's like, wow, I can't imagine like what's actually happening inside that engine. John Doe, what do you think of the UFO hearings? I'm not familiar with UFO hearings. Are they going on right now, like in Washington or something? Solid picks. I love Sarah Sherman. Yes, she's one of the people I like a lot too. She was on last Saturday nights as the widow of Peanut the squirrel. She occasionally will dress up and do really, really silly things. Image Doc Ray. Image Doc Ray could be an X-ray guy, or Imaged O'Cray. It could be something else entirely. I don't know. Has your brother told you what Leno's final tab with Williams was? Well, Williams wasn't charging him for the expertise of the work. All they charged him for was the out-of-pocket stuff. They just said, you pay for the out-of-pocket stuff. We'll do everything else. So his tab still probably was large, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Valerie Ann, I'm old enough to remember when SNL began. They would shut the bar down to watch. No jukebox. Order your drinks now, because once it came on, Yeah. I mean, I remember too, and it was funny because there were things that would happen on Saturday night that they were still talking about Monday morning at school. Did you see that? Oh my God! People freaking out and stuff. The old folks freaking out. Now I am one. Prodigal Stranger, Mike Myers, Dana Carvey, Chris Farley, yours were great, especially when Dennis Miller was doing the weekend update. Yeah, there were highlights in there. Older presidents drove cool cars. Remember the Aqua car? Are you talking about the amphibious car, the Amphicar? Or is the Aqua car a different car? Yeah, a lot of presidents don't drive these days. The Secret Service doesn't like it. But sometimes I list myself, why aren't bicycle and motorcycle pronounced the same? Well, it's the same with millimeter and kilometer. Who knows? So Doug Jones, wasn't the Batmobile a turbine engine? Well, you mean according to the myth of the story, or are you talking about in real life? Because in real life, obviously, it was a Ford Futura, wasn't it? But show car. But allegedly, they would say things like turbine up to speed. I think it's turbine up to speed. But oh boy. MH08 says Juneau is the only state capital that borders another country. Well, I'll give you one, and this is such a minor one, but I'm pretty sure it's still true, is that in Michigan, our capital is Lansing. Lansing is in Ingham County. The county seat of Ingham County is Mason. And I believe that it's the only state capital in the U.S. that is not the county seat of the county within which it sits. Whip that out at a party and impress the babes. Lewis Browning, Landshark. Rules Crypto, I have a concerning issue I just posted a video on. Okay. Well, I hope that helps you. Luxury card store. There's a country in Nevada called the Republic of Molossia. They follow their own laws as well as the laws of the U.S. I've seen a couple of those where people have gotten a piece of property out in the middle of the desert and declared themselves independent. I don't know if that's the one I'm thinking of. I've seen a couple of those. So Devin Bound, Norm Macdonald. Oh Lord. We've talked about Norm Macdonald before. I love Norm Macdonald. I thought he was so funny. And he's passed away now. But the funny part is that he was such a comedian. And I mean that in the sense of like he was dedicated to it, that he would crack jokes about cancer in his later years. And he knew they were his later years because he had cancer. He knew he was dying of it. He was going to die from it. He knew it. and he'd crack jokes about it. And people go, "That's so tasteless. You're cracking jokes about cancer." And he could have said, "I've got cancer. I've got the right to say this." And he didn't. He didn't, because he knew that his true fans would all laugh when he died. Not at him dying, but oh my gosh, do you remember? He was cracking jokes about cancer when he had cancer. So that's like next level. That's like three-dimensional chess right there, my friends. So yeah, Boomer, the killer bees. Get those weird things on their heads. So not a band accounts says LBJ crashed into a lake with an amphicar. Did he? Were the Secret Service like swimming alongside? What were they doing? Although LBJ was the kind of guy, he didn't care what the Secret Service had to say. Oh boy. Ed G, SNL in the 70s with John Belushi portraying Joe Cocker. Don't forget there's a time when he's out there doing his Joe Cocker imitation, and Joe Cocker came out and joined him. So spam shall pass as Michigan is Algonquin. For that's your finger, you fool. You mean when somebody goes like, "What is this?" David Person says there was a place in Australia where the guy proclaimed his own kingdom and declared himself king. That guy died recently, and his kids had a succession crisis. There's also an island in Michigan up here off this coast, or if we're going to do it properly, someplace over here. I can't do it this. And there was an island called Beaver Island, and a guy went out there and declared himself king. And he did that for a little while, and then somebody unalived him. And there wasn't much of an investigation into it because it's kind of like everybody's thought, well, that's what you get. So it was a few years ago, but it's now if you go there, it's all they talk about because now there's not a lot of tourism out there the way they should be. John Brace asks, in a recent video, you were wearing a shirt with an ASA logo. Were you in the Army ASA? No, I was not. And I hope I don't offend people, but I wear shirts sent to me by people out of respect because people say, would you wear this shirt on camera in honor of me, my friends, my compatriots, or people I served with, or my parents, or my mother, my father, my uncle, somebody. And so somebody was in the ASA and sent me that because they'd seen me wearing another shirt. So I've worn shirts for everything from the Coast Guard, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, you name it, the academies, and I've said before, if you send me a shirt that fits, double XL, to P.O. Box 168, Atlas, Michigan, the address is at the end of every single video I do that's on my main channel. If it's a school or a place, it's not offensive, I'll wear it. I'll wear it. So, I mean, I wore just last week one of the shirts from Nimrod, Minnesota. I just like to say it. And the number of school shirts I have is outrageous. I've worn Ohio State shirts on camera. Okay. And I've had people say, but Steve, how can you do that? You're a U of M fan. I just won't wear it the week of the game. That's all. That's all. So Fred Jabubi says, what's the name of the nonprofit that's been mentioned on this channel? We're talking about the Institute for Justice, IJ, Institute for Justice. It's ij.org, ij.org, Institute for Justice. And the important thing about that is I have people contact me and say, Steve, I contacted the IJ. They won't take my case. I'm really angry. And I say, well, number one, you have to understand they are a big organization in the sense that they cover stuff nationwide. But they do have to limit themselves because they get people requesting their help all the time. But they specialize in constitutional law issues. And I've had someone send me a note irate because they wanted help with a child custody case. And I go, well, what's the constitutional law issue there? And they go, well, it doesn't have one. I said, well, I suspect that's why they turned you down. I don't speak for them. I just support them. But keep in mind that they can't help everybody, and they specialize in the constitutional issues. But I think they're a great organization. So it's the ij.org, ij.org. Mitchell Young, have you ever driven a Zamboni? No, I've not. I'd like to. Be fun, I guess. Never thought about it that much. I suspect that somebody go, well, we can't have you drive it during a game for fear you damage the ice. But if anybody offered it to me, I would consider it. Not a band accounts as LBJ drove the foreign dignitaries in his amphicar without telling them it was one, and then pretended to crash into the lake and flipped it to boat mode. Tigerman 99515. I saw Joe Cocker and Stevie Ray Vaughan on the same ticket. Um, Blazer02LS, Dan and John as the Blues Brothers, still being copied these days. You know what's really funny? I remember the Blues Brothers when they made their debut on Saturday Night Live. It was John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd, wearing suits and sunglasses, and they got a suitcase. It's got a harmonica inside of it, and they came out and they're just dancing and singing. And I got a phone call the next day from someone I know who goes, "Did you see those guys on Saturday Night Live last night?" I go, "Which guys?" He goes, "The Blues Brothers." I go, "Yeah, they're pretty funny." And he goes, "They're good." And I said, "No, they're good, but that's just Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi, right?" He goes, "No, it's a band. They're called the Blues Brothers." I go, "You didn't notice that was Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi?" And this person kept arguing with me. "No, it was the Blues Brothers. It wasn't guys from the show. It was." I'm like, "Oh my God." Years later, I'd ask him about things. He goes, "I don't remember that." Of course you don't. You block from your memory the most idiotic things you've done in your life, right? Apparently it's 14-3 Detroit, they tell me now. I just saw it. And I meant to call out who put that up, and I jumped. Oh, Terrell Cockrum, thank you very much. 14-3 Detroit. So, hi gang. Hey Steve, Bob, a bong. Fred Hoyt, Jane was a trooper. Jane, you ignorant. Alex Michael, greetings from Scotland. Thank you for checking from Scotland, my friend. Vic Oli, shirt sponsor for the next Hertz video. If I had a Hertz shirt, I'd wear it. The one thing I'll tell you, though, is I've had people ask me, they go, "Steve, you've got a shirt for this, and you didn't wear it on camera. Why not?" Well, I've got 150 shirts over here, and they're inside out. So if you said, "Steve, quick, find the shirt with the such and such on it," ain't finding anything quick. It's gonna take me a while. And by the time I find it, it won't be funny anymore. So, Lion Zookeeper from Mount Morris, Michigan. I'm assuming you're up near the peak of Mount Morris. It's like Mount Clemens. It's perfectly flat. My last job, I had to wear a hard hat. I got an Ohio State hard hat just to upset everyone. M.E. Matt Getz as U.S. Attorney General. Thoughts? I refuse to do politics. I'm sorry. You guys can debate that amongst yourselves, but I will not do it. A couple of weeks ago, I was reading in the comments, and I didn't catch it during the live stream, but somebody said, somebody asked a question that's very, very obviously political. And somebody else said, "Hey, Steve doesn't do politics, so don't feel offended if he skips your question." And the guy goes, "That's all he does is talk about politics. Everything he talks about is politics." And the person said, "What are you talking about?" Like right at that time, I was talking about the Bar Association in Florida. And the guy goes, "He's talking about the Bar Association. That's politics." Okay. If you want to take the position that everything is politics, okay, I won't talk about politics involving political parties and or the governance of our nation. How's that? Okay. If you think the Bar Association is politics, I'm a member of the bar. I'm not making a political statement by telling you that. I have to be to practice law in the state of Michigan. So, blah, blah, blah. I went to a Leon Russell concert. Was totally surprised that everyone was wearing a cowboy hat. Leon Russell is one of those guys who, sadly, I don't think ever got the recognition outside of the musical industry they should have. Leon Russell was amazing. He had an album called Carney that came out in the 70s. Manhattan Island Serenade, Tightrope. But he also, for instance, he co-wrote the song Superstar, which is a huge hit for the Carpenters, for instance. And he had one of the most evocative voices when he's saying, I mean, that guy felt pain, and you could feel it when you listened to him in a good way. And I loved his music. I never got a chance to see him live. He routinely played in Detroit in very, very small places, like the Magic Bag and so on. Talking about a place that would seat like a couple hundred people. And it was always very, very disappointing to me that he didn't get larger audiences. But he was one of those road warriors. He was just on the road constantly. And you talk to other musicians, you're like, "Oh, Leon Russell, yeah." And his songwriting abilities were also quite pronounced. But like I said, most people only know when I mentioned the song Superstar, they go, "Oh yeah, I've heard that, of course." And there's a whole story behind that song, of course, because Bonnie Bramlett was involved, and there were some earlier versions of it recorded before the Carpenters got it. And the Carpenters just turned it into a sad song, you know. But if you hear the original versions, I believe the original title, the working title, was Groupie. And if you listen to the lyrics, it's a it's a person who follows the musicians around, perhaps stalking them a bit. So that's Leon Russell. So yeah, it turns out that he had a big following in the country field, but it's not like his music got played on country stations. It didn't. It was just kind of a way thing that worked out. So Frank JC the third says, I have an idea for a t-shirt, plain white t-shirt with the phrase triggering political statement. It's like the generic. Remember when you go to the store and buy generic stuff? It's like in a white box and they had just a generic pasta or something. So Stephen Cook says, I really like Leon Redbone. Not to be confused with Leon Russell. And then Leon Redbone, of course, not to be confused with the band Redbone. Come and Get Your Love was Redbone. And Leon Redbone appeared on Saturday Night Live early on, one of the first seasons, and is saying, among other things, Ain't Misbehaving. And he had that really cool singing style where he kind of mumbled. Oh, boy. Daniel Kester, how about the dead parrot skit? Very funny. Back to Monty Python. Hey, Daniel, how you, my friend? Doug Jones, Robin Williams in a Scottish accent, the inception of the game of golf. Yeah, he had a bunch of funny stuff. Remember that he started out doing stand-up comedy, and then he went into sitcoms and movies, and he played very serious roles. He played comedic roles, and his life ended in tragedy. But the guy's career was astounding. So. Andy Evans beer. Ask for it by name. Didn't they make generic beer? Just plain beer. Mark Miller, I want to have my brother, who's a graphic artist, create a shirt that says "Citizens for a Knee-Jerk Reaction." Lewis Browning, spam, eggs, and spam. One of the greatest things of all time about Monty Python, and I mentioned this previously, and I'll just briefly. But there was an American television critic who wrote a column about how dumb Monty Python was. And this is before it took off on PBS in America. And he actually ripped on the skit about the Spanish Inquisition. And he goes, the entire skit is based on one punchline repeated over and over again that nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. Guy goes, it's not funny. It's stupid. It's annoying. It'll never succeed. I don't understand how anybody could like this. And yet here we are, 50 years later? And I can tell you, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. And people laugh because they think of Monty Python. They don't think of the saying from before that. Like they took that saying and made it their own. Image Doc Ray says Robin Williams actually started as an actor when he was in school. Which school? I know that he was in Michigan at one point in time, believe it or not. Went to Country Day, which is right down the road from where I used to live. I know he went to Country Day, and then I know that he was doing stand-up when he got out in California, and that somebody had seen him. And then when they were casting for Mork and Mindy, somebody goes, "Hey, I think I got the guy who could play an alien for you." So, Valerie Ann, Leon Russell, do you know what I mean? Not familiar off the top of my head. Kenneth Darkwater. Woohoo! Finally caught another Steve live. They're not that hard. It's just Sundays at 1 Eastern time. Oh boy. Blazer 02 LS Vintage Benny Hill couldn't do a lot of that stuff today. No, you couldn't. And even some of it was borderline politically incorrect at the time. Benny Hill, though, is one of those guys where he was just himself. You couldn't replace him. He wasn't imitating anybody. He was just he was just Benny Hill. If you don't know, if you've never seen him, you can't describe it. But if you see him later on, you're watching him go, this has got to be Benny Hill. It's got to be. It's got to be. M3, I still watch Monty Python. I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay. Somebody a couple years ago gave me for Christmas the complete set of the DVDs. And what's interesting about it is that the Monty Python series in England was a little different than it was presented in the US, because in America, it had to be shortened to jam it into whatever space they're putting it into. Kind of like the way they had to shorten or add to the Three Stooges shorts, because they wouldn't fit into an hour perfectly. So they had to put them in and slice them up and stuff. And I remember watching the DVDs in order and seeing scenes, but also entire skits I'd never seen before. And I thought I'd seen them all. And it turns out it's like, no, it turns out there were some that either weren't broadcast in America or were added quite late or were chopped up so that you didn't see big portions of them on the telly, as they say. Yeah, W. Parks and Mork and Mindy was a spin-off of Happy Days, as was Laverne and Shirley and Joni Loves Chachi. And don't get me going. Did somebody put you up to this? Happy Days. Besides the fact that it gave us the phrase "jump the shark," Happy Days is the greatest example of how American television gets everything so wrong. Because Happy Days, by the way, was originally started as a skit on Love American Style, believe it or not. But it was also inspired by the success of like American Graffiti and so on. And there's a certain longing for nostalgia in America. So they come up with this show based in Milwaukee. It's about a high school kid and his goofy buddies. And they're going to high school. And along the way, they bump into a guy named Arthur Fonzarelli, who was not wearing a leather jacket until later. And they're just going through typical high school things, you know, the sock hop, the drag races, that kind of thing. And the show becomes so successful that almost immediately the people on screen stop dressing like they're in the 50s. So they go from having the greased back hair in the first season to all having, you know, feathered, blown, dried hair in the second season. And Richie at one point in time is dating a girl who's got a Dorothy Hamill haircut, which is such a specific, distinct period of time that is not in the 50s. It's ridiculous. And then they have all these dumb spin-offs, and it's because the guys who created the show are going, hey, this show's making so much money. How can we expand this? Well, let's spin off some stuff. And at one point, let's spin off an alien. Oh, that makes a lot of sense because Milwaukee's got a lot of those that come from outer space, right? So anyways, the show, I mean, but MASH did the same thing. MASH, of course, ran 10 times the length of the war it was depicting. And watch the later episodes. They're not even pretending to look like they're in an army outfit during a war. I mean, you know, the hairstyles, the clothing, everything is completely wrong, but they didn't care because people watched it. So it also goes to show you what they could get away with network television in the 60s and 70s. So there you go. Daniel Kester didn't care for Joni Loves Chachi. Dude, that's a kind of a statement you shouldn't have to make out loud. Everyone assumes that you don't like Joni Loves Chachi unless you pipe up and go, oh, I like that show. Because nobody liked it. Come on. MH08, take this bus to Cuba. The prodigal stranger, Fonz couldn't wear the leather jacket if he was on the motorcycle. I do know that at one point in time during the opening sequence, Fonzie raises his hand and waves. And I believe he waves with the hand that would have been on the throttle. But I think then you look at it and you realize they reversed it because they wanted it to look different. I mean, it's just not that big of a deal, but you know what I'm talking about. Idris Taylor, Till Death Do Us Part, and Love Thy Neighbor are two UK shows you could not screen today. I've not seen either one. Don't know. Biggie Fitz was born in 81. The only Monty Python stuff I remember is some guy ate so much he exploded. But that was from a movie. That was from a story. You know I'm getting at. It's from the movie. The Meaning of Life. Here, one last mint. I'm full. No. Just a little mint. Just a little. Just try it. It was disgusting. Terrell Cockrum, 21-3 Detroit. Brian W. Fonzie went Evil Knievel. Mark Miller, I thought Happy Days was a spinoff from American Graffiti. It was kind of inspired by it, but believe it or not, they did a skit on a Love American Style, which is an ABC show. That had a bunch of skits on it. They did a skit set in the 60s, and they had the characters that were later on Happy Days. And I'm now breaking out the fluids because we are 1 hour into the show, and I'm woefully dehydrated. Oh boy. Southern Torn, have you ever seen Are You Being Served? It's hilarious. I have not. I've heard of it. Yeah, what of The Meaning of Life? Kenneth Darkwater, what's a chachi? It's a goofy name somebody made up that would sound cool. It's like the Fonz, man, the Fonz. Beata Graf Abdelhagen says Cuba is also a city in New Mexico, so you could take a bus there. So when you say take this plane to Cuba, do you think they're going to take us to New Mexico? Oh boy, Doctor Havar. Good morning. And by the way, I mentioned the man with two brains the other day. Can't remember why. Oh, we're talking about roadside sobriety tests. Lewis Browning still waiting for Chuck Cunningham to come back down the stairs. Yeah, Richie had an older brother for like 3 episodes, and he just disappeared without any explanation. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with that because I have another theory. Nobody listens to me anyways. Chris Bautista says that a vintage. No, this is actually a Yeti that someone sent into me and said, "Hey, Steve, you need one of these for your lives." I said, "Yes, I do. Thank you." I'm convinced that television producers don't understand, and they let the stars have too much power. And so, when, like, for instance, give you an example, Friends, they have an ensemble cast on Friends, right? There's a bunch of stars, and a couple of them start getting uppity. What they should do is go, okay, fine, leave, and just replace them, and not even mention it. And there'd be a little bit of noise in the media going, "Hey, how come they replaced this person with that person?" And the producers could say, well, they had demands we couldn't meet, so we just replaced them. So what? People think the actors and actresses write their lines. They don't. Bring in another actress and boom, no one will even notice. No one will even care. Mr. Smithers is using a Yeti right now. Shex Densmore says the meaning of life is 42. Yeah, but what's the question? Oh boy. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Douglas Adams. I am a huge fan. I've read everything he's written, including his nonfiction stuff. And it was. I remember how mortified I was when he passed away because he died rather young. But he'd written some fabulous stuff, and he wrote a book called Last Chance to See. And he had written a lot of his science fiction stuff, and he wrote the Dirk Gently books. And he was thinking about all of these animals out there that are on the edge of extinction. And some of them we're aware of. Like, we know that this animal is endangered or borderline, whatever. And he decided to travel the world and just go look at some of them and write about them. And it's a travelogue, but it's fascinating because he's such an intelligent and entertaining writer that the book was wonderful. It was wonderful. So it's very, very sad. So Frank JC III says, yeah, there's 2 Darrens on Bewitched. I mean, who cares? And Imagocracy says the same thing. MHOH says they were hammered on Bewitched. That wouldn't surprise me. There's also something about the Brady Bunch, the father. Apparently, the guy who played the father apparently had issues with alcohol. Now, I'm not making fun of people who have problems with alcohol. It's just sad that some people, either because they get famous and can't handle it, or the pressure they're under to perform. In other words, it's not just go out and do your lines, but go out and do your lines and get good ratings. And sometimes it's not up to them. So. Shex Densmore says in 1973, Williams attained a full scholarship at the Juilliard School in New York City. How long was he there? I'm just curious. Jerry Brown says War Machine is supposed to take over Iron Man because Robert Downey Jr. got uppity. By the way, whoever thought that Robert Downey Jr. would come back from all the bad publicity he had at that one point in his career? Dr. M. Havar says done some screen script writing, worked with some seasoned entertainment veterans. Just throw that out there. But the question is, do they understand that you're the one putting the words in their mouths? Alan Brown Sr., have you seen Porky's? I don't think I've seen it all the way through. It's one of those movies that came out at a time when I didn't see a lot of movies. I just didn't see it. I remember the ad where it's some guy's eye looking through a knothole. I know there's some famous people in it. Was Kim Cantrell in that? but I never saw it. But I can tell you a funny story that you reminded me of that. When I lived in Bad Axe, and I worked in Bad Axe. What year was Porky's? I don't know if I continue telling the story exactly the way I want to, unless I know what year Porky's was. Hang on, come on. Steve goes to the phone. I used to have IMDb right there. Hang on. What year was Porky's? In case somebody can tell me before I find it. 1981. Okay, it checks out. Good. So here's the deal. When I lived in Bad Axe, Michigan, I moved there in 1982. I was there from 82 to 83. And while I lived there, I got to learn about small town life. And there was a movie theater in Bad Axe called the Bad Axe Theater. I think it's still there. But there was also a theater someplace up north, maybe in Port Austin or maybe in Port Hope, which had been around the over here, or hang on. No, over here. Okay. And they were going to show Porky's. And I was at the station one day early for some reason, and a bunch of people came in, and it was unusual that there's a bunch of strangers in the building, and they got ushered back into the station manager's or the station owner's office, and they closed the door. And I asked somebody, "What's going on?" And they go, "That's a group of citizens who are very, very upset that they're going to show Porky's at the theater." And I think it was a theater, not in Bad Axe, but a theater someplace else. And I go, "So why are they here?" And they go, "Well, because they've been running ads for it on this radio station." And I go, "Okay, so why don't they run ads against it? I mean, why are they here?" And eventually they left. But apparently they'd come in to complain and goes, you guys can't run ads for that movie theater. That movie they're showing is immoral. You can't do that. And I think the station owner said, movie's not even rated X. I think it was probably R-rated, right? They show R-rated movies there all the time. And besides, have you guys seen the movie? And of course they haven't, you know. So I just remember there was a big brouhaha because these local people with nothing better to do on their time on their hands came into the radio station to complain about whether or not the station was going to run ads for an R-rated movie at the local theater. Feral Kitty says that her big brother took her to see Porky's when their big brothers were babysitting me. And I said her, and I realized it could just Feral Kitty could be a guy. I don't know. I apologize. Jerry C says, "Would I have any recourse on an idiot neighbor that parks his vehicles in front of my house? Then the jerk also parks them halfway up on the sidewalk as well. Are they on your property or are they on public property?" And interestingly, many people don't know this, but it depends what state you are in. But in some states, although there might be a sidewalk in front of your house and even a road in front of your house, your property might go out to the middle of that road, and the city, state, or whoever else has an easement over it, likewise with the sidewalk. Meaning that the space between the sidewalk and the road, while it might be included in an easement, may also be your property. Meaning that if it's not designed for public parking, you might have some stay over that, but it's going to depend what state you're in and so on. So, Feral Kitty says, "I'm a her." Okay. Didn't want to ask, but I guess so. MHOA says, "Yeah, 1982. Karens." Yeah, we hadn't invented that terminology yet. John Zabel, like, "I used to be skinny, now I'm Porky." Oh, boy. Dan Boyd, "I missed 67 minutes. You could go back to the beginning and play it at double time, and I think you'd catch up before we're done." Boy, I hate it when I jump in the middle of a conversation. I'm like, Elliot says, "Hey, Jerry, did you see my previous post?" Okay. The Prodigal Stranger says, "I'm in shape. Round is a shape." Technically, hey, 1 is a number too. So something can be numerous. Now, it has an implication of many, but technically speaking, I think numerous merely means being number-like. So, Manitoba Misanthrope, good day and greetings and salutations from Winnipeg. Dan Boyd, I used to be borderline obese. Now I'm down to flabby. Chuck Puck, do you have to buy the mineral rights to your land separately or are they part of the sale? It depends on if they ever got separated previously. And in many states, the mineral rights got bought up separately a long, long time ago. So you might theoretically own a piece of property, but not the mineral rights. However, to extract the minerals, depending on the state you're in, the person extracting them has got to do it in the least interfering way, the way that will interfere with you least. So in other words, they can't go, well, gee, you got a house here in 20 acres. We're going to level your house and put a pump right there. They got to go, okay, there's 20 acres. We're going to put a pump back here. We'll put the pump back here. Because I used to live in South Lyon, Michigan, southwest corner of Oakland County. And there were farmers' fields that had pumps out in the middle. It was pumping, I don't know if it was oil or natural gas. They're pumping something. And I've talked to people in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan who live in homes where the mines absolutely own the mineral rights beneath the home. Good news is, at least in the copper mines, they can dig down here and then tunnel across. And as long as the ground doesn't cave in, you're fine, which happens from time to time. Oh, Boomer, 1 is the loneliest number that you'll ever see. I was just thinking about that the other day. The book Three Dog Nightmare that I read. Oh, another story altogether. So, M3 Lions 27. But what do their opponents have? Is the number greater, less than, or equal to 27? Andy S. New Hampshire in the house. Sig 226. How about easement rights? We're talking about recorded easements, which you should check those when you buy a piece of property, and you should look for whether they're recorded or not. I've owned at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 homes in my life where I could show you the document that shows my property lines, middle of the street. And I tell people, what? Yeah. But it was granted a long time ago when somebody goes, we need to put a road through here to develop the town. And they go, sure, go ahead. 27-3 says Jay Klein. Andrew Kruszowski says Three Dog Nightmare. That's a great name. Well, it's a play on the phrase Three Dog Night, which the band, which had a song called One, among other things. Huge band from the 70s. Dragon Aturl says, didn't you do a video recently about a company that's being sued for digging foundations too deep without having mineral rights? Yes. Thank you for mentioning it. I'd forgotten all about it. I think it was because they're putting up wind turbines. And the foundations had to go down so far. And the question becomes, how deep does the foundation go before it starts interfering with that below it, mineral right wise? So, Dan E. Boyd, public dedicated street thoroughfare eclipses property rights. But my point simply is that the public dedicated street is there for a purpose. And so if somebody can't build a house on the sidewalk and go, well, hey, this is public, I'm building a house here. The sidewalk is there for people to pass back and forth across in a legal manner. And so there's that. James Milano, hello from Puebla, Mexico. Not Pueblo, but Puebla. Chris Badessa says, if street is removed, property where the road was reverts. It could. It depends on how long it's been abandoned. My parents at one point in time had a piece of property where there had been a side street that connected 2 other streets. And at one point in time, the city abandoned it and actually said, you guys can have it. And so it became grass, which we got to mow. What of says that Apple Macintosh OS calculator, when asked to divide 1 by 0, it gives the result, not a number. Other places, and I've seen a discussion here going on where it'll say things like, undefined and that kind of thing. Ed G, do you remember the big Toledo green scales they used to have in supermarkets up front? I always hate it when it hit 60. It was like 4-barrel carb kicked in and everyone was watching. I remember those. And the supermarket I'm thinking of, it was out in the vestibule. There's 2 sets of doors and it was between those. I'm not sure what they'd weigh out there, but they used to weigh something. But it's an A&P store, Atlantic and Pacific. and I've mentioned this before, A&P, one of their signatures, one of their trademark items was their fresh ground coffee. So you'd go to the coffee aisle, you'd get a bag, you'd fill it with coffee, but it wasn't ground yet. You'd then take it to the front, and when the cashier got to it, she'd go, "Would you like me to grind this for you?" And you go, "Yes." She'd dump it in the top, put the bag underneath, and grind it. And all that coffee grind, all the smell of that coffee grinding would make the store smell. I was a kid. I didn't drink coffee. I could go in the store and get a buzz. I mean, it was crazy. And I was at it. I mentioned not too long ago, I went to an antique show over the weekend, more of a junk fair outdoors, but whatever. And a guy had a coffee grinder from A&P. And I was so tempted to buy it just because. I'm like, what am I going to do with it? The guy goes, "I even know what store it came from." And I'm like, "What am I going to do with it?" I mean, it was too big to put in the set. It wouldn't have made sense, but it was so cool. Chuck Puck, if you owned the middle of the street, can you put in your own meters? No, the city can. It's part of what they have the easement for. The prodigal stranger, can't tell you how much coffee I ground as a cashier in high school for the A&P, no less. Yeah, A&P is a fascinating story. I read a book, and I forgot what the book's called now, but there was a family of people, I believe it's a Hartford family. I could be wrong, and it's close. And the family owned it, and a couple generations down, all of the money went to one kid who just screwed it all up and lost it all. But A&P at one point in time, a lot of people know about Sears. They go, "Yes, Sears, of course, was this catalog where you could order anything, and world's largest store." A&P, however, was the grocery store chain that swept America. There were A&Ps everywhere, including the Italian Hall. The lower floor of it, half of it was an A&P store. Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, 1913, Calumet, Michigan. And there was one a couple blocks from my house in Birmingham. So Betty Boop, remember your mowing war with your neighbor claiming your property line? Of course I do. I drove by that house Friday night. I actually thought, I'm in the area. I'll drive, or Thursday. I'll drive by. Oh, blah, 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 chock full of nuts. See, that's one of those things where when I was a little kid, I'm looking at the name going, does that name make any sense? And then, of course, there were those wacky packs that came out that were making fun of all the different brands names. Oh, Tiger Man 995. I remember going to the thrift drugstore as a kid and buying tubes for our TV. I remember seeing tube testers and tube displays. I can't remember if it was a drugstore or at the hardware store. Because when I was growing up, the strip mall is still there. It's about half mile south of where my parents lived. And there was an A&P store, a Perry Pharmacy, and Maskell's Hardware. And I'm not sure if they were affiliated with any of these other companies like ACO or Ace or anything like that, but it was a family hardware store. So down at one end of it, they had things like cuckoo clocks and furniture and gardening supplies. And at the other end, they had toys and stuff. I remember my first baseball glove I bought from Maskell's, baseball bats, Maskell's. And it was weird because you could actually go to this one little strip mall and grocery shop, drugstore, and everything else was all in this one little strip. And I think the first to go, Perry Pharmacy got bought by somebody else. A&P went out. I forget what year A&P disappeared. A&P, that building is now a mortgage company. I guess they just wanted the floor space. The drugstore became something else, and then the hardware store disappeared. And the hardware store had been owned by a local family. I just don't know if they just gave up because they knew they couldn't compete or what. But Michael G.W. Frog says the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company. Yes, A&P. A&P. Solid Pixel says Eckerd's drugstore had the testers for us. Blazer 2LS. Sears is trying to make a comeback, even selling craftsman tools. You can't resurrect that. You cannot. The generation of people who remember what Sears used to be aren't. I won't go back. I won't go back. People younger than us don't know who they were. They're like, what? And Rico March says Sears didn't optimize the internet. Well, that, and also when things started turning south for them, they needed to pick stuff up. In fact, I've seen comedians, including Jay Leno, Thursday night, cracking jokes about how you go into Sears, you couldn't find help, like nobody was there. And I remember the last time I was in a Sears, I was looking for something that they actually had. I couldn't find someone to help me. And now the building that Sears was in is gone. Like not just Sears, but the whole building is gone. Image Doc Ray says tube testers were common everywhere. I used to use them a lot. When though? When? Because I mean, I'm talking about it may have been a little bit before me, just a little bit. Betty Boop says, folks, remember to hit the like button. It helps Steve. Sure. Chris Batista says, I loved purchasing tools at Sears. But I remember when you could walk into Sears with a broken Craftsman tool. No receipt. You didn't need that. You walked over and go, hey, I broke this. They go, good. Go grab another one. That was it. Go grab another one. And okay, you could have bought it at a garage sale. You could have gotten it broken at a garage sale. Didn't matter. Go replace it. And that's the kind of thing that ingrained in an entire generation of mechanics and people working their cars, that these tools are worth your money. Now, of course, the Snap-on tools. The question how many payments you have to make. But the fact is that Craftsman owned that market. And not anymore. So Dan Boyd, I love the old Sears Auto Center architecture. Sears Auto Center. Oh, Jerry C. Who do I talk to? Well, you need to go to your county and look at the register of deeds and look at the deed to your property and see where the property lines go. And you'll probably see the property lines here, and it'll say street, and it'll say sidewalk. And if there's no parking or no parking signs, I would just complain and go, the guy's parking on my lawn. I mean, come on, that's pretty straightforward. Michael Welch says from 1915 through 1975, A&P was the largest grocery retailer in the United States, and until 1965, totally defunct in 2015. Yeah, and Tim Noel says, of course, Sears diehard batteries is the same thing. And I realize you can buy these things from other retailers now, but it's not the same thing. And Kenmore, diehard, Craftsman. Those three names were so valuable, and Sears I realize they flipped them off and sold them to somebody else, or flipped them to somebody else. But they aren't what they used to be. So Tigerman99515 says tube audio is coming back. Vintage tube receivers are crazy. Yeah, I mean, talk to guys who play the guitar, and they'll talk about tube amps versus this artificial stuff you can make. Sub GR77 says the tube tester at my local drugstore disappeared in 87 or 88. It's probably last used in about 81 or 82. Jeff N4 POD, Sears was the original Amazon. Yes. And more importantly, what Sears proved was that you could sell things through the mail. And so the people out in the middle of nowhere, Upper Peninsula of Michigan, Alaska, hundreds of miles from the nearest city, and they could open up a Sears catalog and order anything they wanted. And it was miraculous for that time. You could order a house. You could order a car. Surprised you couldn't order a wife. Probably could at one time or another. Betty Boop, remember the Sears Christmas catalog? Yes. Ember Miss 69 says the story from last week about the lady who bought land from the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. I understand regular folks need to pull permits. However, if a government entity does work, are they required to pull permits? I believe they are. I believe they are supposed to, at least, because of the fact that they want the different government entities communicating with each other. But of course, if they don't, what are you going to do? Arrest them? So the bigger question is, permits may have been pulled. They may have pulled permits. And so to know that the permits got pulled, you have to go check the property records. And that's what I'm wondering, is if somebody did that or not. So the reason I talk about this so authoritatively is not just that I'm an attorney. I've had a building demolished before. And I know you pull a demolition permit. And I know what it looks like. I've read one before. And the permit says, here's who's doing this. Here's when the work's going to get done, blah, 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 and all of this stuff. And so if somebody were to go onto the property that I had where that building was demolished, you'd walk out there and go, there's nothing here. But if you went and checked the records, you go, oh, there used to be a building that got demolished because its demo permit describes it. When it was done, who did it, where it was, blah, blah, blah. It explains everything. So somebody either didn't pull permits in the first place, which would be a problem, or permits were pulled, but nobody checked to see if they were out there. That'd be the other problem. So I don't know which it is. So there you go. Lewis Browning, I own a Sears house, 1901. How can you, I mean, can you tell? Do you know which model it is? I've seen people actually have photographs go, this is the Sears house I've got. Here's what model it is. It's a fascinating concept because some of them are actually quite intricate. I always assumed they'd be simple. Like you don't want, no, back in 1901, you ship somebody a house, they know how to build it. You know, back then they knew how, they had those skills. Southern Torrance says, I'm pretty sure the kid in Where the Red Fern Grows ordered the dogs through a catalog. Was it Sears though? Fred Hoyt, false teeth. Oh, there was a time also when you could go to Sears and they had a dentist and they had a barber and they had all kinds of services there that you wouldn't expect. And so I remember talking to my mother back in the early 80s, I think it was. And she had some work done in the house. I said, who did it? And I meant, what was the name of the contractor? And she goes, Sears. And I go, Sears did the work? And she goes, well, I called up Sears and I needed this work done. They did the work. And of course, Sears didn't have contractors of that sort on their staff. They just had a bunch that they would call, and you would deal with Sears, and this other person would do the work, and you just hope it worked out. I, at one point in time, filed a class action lawsuit, very complicated, against Sears over building plumbing permits, because people who used to call Sears and ask for a water heater, Sears would send somebody out and they'd install it, and Sears would take the money for the permit, and nobody ever pulled a permit. And that was a fun case. But again, people just, there was a time when people go, I have a need around the house, call Sears. So the prodigal stranger says mail order brides were a thing, but doesn't recall ever seeing one in the Sears and Roebuck catalog. Yeah, I know. I mean, I think you can still do that today. It's called an internet bride or groom. So Dougie Deuce says, in old magazines, there are mail order brides in the back sections. Russian, Czech, South American, Asian, you name it. There are also ads for X-ray specs from Johnson & Smith. Oh, boy. Oh, Zachary Schmook, holiday photos from J.C. Penney after getting your haircut across the store. Or when the stores had restaurants in them, like the Hudson's, Macy's, Marshall, what I don't even know what they're called these days. Zach, I think you can buy a tiny home off of Amazon. Yeah, I don't think it's a kit form though, is it? Or if it is, it's partially assembled. It's got to be. You could not ship somebody a dismantled house these days and expect them to build it. Lowell Riggs, I am. Hey, I'm awake. I made it. Yeah, you got a good half hour left too. Ray Brensicki says, before everyone had a computer, if pennies didn't have your size of jeans, you went to the basement to the catalog desk and used that, and the people at the desk took the order as recent as late 90s. I'd crack a joke here about how many people are in the basement with you, but that doesn't surprise me at all. I mentioned this before. I remember buying tickets in the basement, I think it was of Sears, for a concert, because they had one of those convenient ticket corporation, the CTC terminals, that later on they were elsewhere too. L. Grant Nelson, my grandfather built his own house without a foundation with asbestos siding. Those are the days. Doug Jones, I try to support local stores, but when I can't find stuff in local stores, but on Amazon, what choice do you have? And here's the thing. I'm not sure I told the story or not. I had a little tiny cap, a little cap pop off of a vacuum hose on my Cobra. And so one day I popped the hood of my Cobra and I looked down and I'm going, there's a vacuum hose right there, vacuum line that I think it's supposed to be capped. So I pulled out photographs I took of it when I first bought it, and sure enough, there's a cap on there. And I'm like, this cap, where did the cap go? And I was talking to my good friend Mark Lieberman. He goes, well, Steve, if the cap popped off, it may have popped off like if it shook when it started or something backfired. Who knows? He goes, it's probably wherever you started the car that morning, which would be in my garage. So I walk out my garage. There it is, a little plastic cap about that big. Just popped off this line, So I want to put it back on, but, it'll pop back off again, possibly. I could glue it back on, but that's not advisable. So I thought, I'll put a little clamp around it that I can tighten with a screwdriver, little worm gear clamp. I went to Tractor Supply, didn't have them. Went to the hardware store, didn't have them. I went to Meijer, didn't have them. I literally went everywhere, and I finally said, I hate to do it, but I'll go to Walmart. I walked into Walmart, and they had a collection of clamps, a variety of sizes, including a little tiny one, which is the size I needed. So I bought the whole assortment, but I had to do it, but I was about to order from Amazon. I'm like, I was going out of my way, going to different stores that didn't have them. I remember I walked into the Tractor Supply. Very nice woman goes, oh, yeah, right over here. And there's like 3 prongs sticking out of the wall that are empty. And I go, I think the one I needed is this size here. And she's, yeah, we don't have those. So, Ed G, put on your Sunday's best, gang. We're going to Sears. Daniel Kester had horses. They'd get equipment for them through Sears, saddles and so on. Cool. Ryan Holtzinger, Meijer is a Michigan thing. Yeah, I think they're expanding though, aren't they? But Meijer is based out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. I remember when they first came to Oakland County, people were freaking. Oh my gosh, this is a huge store called Meijer. Oh my God. Because Meijer got here before Walmart did. Walmart invaded from the south. There you go. Dan Boyd has Meijers in Southern Ohio. And there I'm saying Meijers as in plural. Meijer is one of those names. It's like Kroger. It's not Kroger's. It's not Meijers. It's not Ford's. I drive a Ford's. No, you don't. You drive a Ford. Padre auto parts stores should have hose clamps. I think I went to one, but at that point I was getting angry. Troy Built says the same thing. Zach, the hardware store he went to had a sign saying, we're doing as best as we can. Oh, boy. Valerie Ann and the Steve shall bring them together, referring to, I guess, the rings. Old Paint 71 says is a Meijer in Green Bay. I know we've got them in the UP also. Shaban says, I say Meijers and Kroger, so many of us do. Oh, no, everybody does. Everybody does. What's funny is I wrote a book about Bobby Isaac. And Bobby Isaac, his name was Isaac. I've seen photographs of him wearing something that's embroidered Isaacs with an S. And everybody called him Bobby Isaacs. And there's something about how easy it is to say a word with an S on the end of it, Isaacs, as opposed to Isaac. And I was thinking about that and ran across an article with an interview with Mr. Hendrick from Hendrick Motorsports. And somebody apparently asked him about people mispronouncing the name, saying Hendricks. And he goes, it's a Southern thing. So, but it's universal. Oh. Richard Terhune, Tim Allen does a great stand-up routine on Sears. I don't know that I've heard that. Doug Jones, go to your local small engine repair store. I don't know where there's a small engine repair store near me, but I've got the clamp now. I think I actually got a couple. So, Joshua C., why do you say milk instead of milk? I don't say milk. Milk. Sorry. Zach, do they still have a pony ride for a penny at Meijer? Yes, they do. I've never seen anybody on it though. Never. I'd almost be shocked to see a kid on that, but they have to leave it there. They have to. Tim Noel says, years ago, my parents were considering buying a 2-acre plot of land, but decided against it when they found out part of that acreage included the neighborhood street that went through it. But was the street visible, or it was platted to be a street if they wanted to in the future? Because that would be a problem, obviously. Mike Terrell's got to run. Desert Diagnostics, what do you think about businesses supplying a service to smog cars by undisclosed methods with non-disclosure trade secret anomalies? Oh boy, people don't understand. The feds take that quite seriously, and it's true, they don't catch everybody. When they catch people, man, they come down them like a ton of bricks. So, Rules Crypto, I've learned to never let big concern go unresolved, and I will fight for truth in the face of lies. Okay. There's no call to action in your statement. See, so I don't really know how to respond to that. Blazer O2LS, Sears, Montgomery Ward, JC Whitney, Ben Franklin, Algona. JC Whitney or JC Penny? Because there's the JC Whitney catalog where you can find like 75 different kinds of auga horns and literally a whole chapter on stuff you can hang from your mirror, your rear view. Nathan Carver, I know the craft store is Joanne, but I can't help but say Joanne's. Like Joanne's Fabric? Yeah. Fly Chomper Fly, I worked at a radio station in Albany, New York that was a Sears catalog, prefab house. Really? Did it look like a house? Because the station I worked at in Bad Axe, WLEW, which is still there, was a house. And it looks like a house on the outside. It was nothing elaborate, but it's the house. It's clearly not a commercial building. It's a house. I don't know if anybody ever lived in it. I think it's somebody just said, hey, let's build a house and put a radio station in it. So Foxy Thrani says Sears still exists. In theory. Blazer O2LS, JC Whitney Auto Parts. Aren't they still around? JC Whitney, because that means a catalog business. How hard could that be to keep going? Fly Chomper Fly, WABY. I worked at WABX for a while in Detroit. No relation at all. Just that they both have call letters. Galveston Island Transparency. I think you can order a whole VW bug out of JC Whitney. They've got other replacement parts. You might think, well, I can just build one, right? And likewise, Old Paints is about a Jeep. I can tell you that there's also a company called Iron Horse that makes Jeep parts. And I remember when I had my Jeep, I got the catalog and I flipped through it. I think, for instance, I bought a locking center console unit. My Jeep didn't have anything there, and so I just put in a center console, but it locked, which is pretty cool to have. Because otherwise, everything inside a Jeep is fair game. Daniel Kester asked about the Canadian robot lady. She's not here today. She'll be here shortly. So, not shortly today, but shortly soon is just not today. Doug Jones, they were fighting over the Sears catalog in the show MASH. Did they order something like a hot tub or something? Not a hot tub, but something else, something big. Oh boy. Southern Torn, I wonder if the ghost of Sears hangs out with the ghost of Toys R Us. Toys R Us is a weird one. I assume that Toys R Us probably was under a lot of pressure from the internet, but there is something about the tactile experience of touching toys and shopping for little kids, right? But my understanding is that Toys R Us was more of a corporate screw up, that I think they took on a lot of debt, perhaps a hostile takeover of some sort. It's been a while since I looked at it, but it's one of those companies that probably could have survived with different management. Let's just put it that way. Zach says, every time I go to Meijer, they're pulling MH08 off the pony. Hey, it's just a penny a ride. Come on. Lewis Browning, S&H green stamps. That's one of those things. I never quite understood that, but it's one of the earliest loyalty programs they had, where if you went to a store and bought something like an A&P, they'd go, would you like the stamps? And if you said yes, they'd hit a thing and they'd give you stamps for how much money you spent. And then you get these booklets and you put the stamps in the booklets, and then S&H or whoever the other company, there are a couple of different companies, they'd say for like 35 complete booklets, you can get this for free, or 25. And it had its own little prize booklet thing. And it was just designed to keep you shopping at places that had the green stamps. And it's an early loyalty program. And my mom did that for a while. And I remember her coming back from shopping and sticking these things in a booklet. And I'm like, oh, what's this? And she goes, yeah, well, so one of these days we can get this stuff. I'm like, what do we need for that? And she's like, 120 booklets. And I'm like, I'm not going to live that long. Oh, Daniel Kessler says the guys in MASH ordered a bathtub through Sears. I thought it was something big involving water. I was thinking like a swimming pool or something. I don't know why. The Tribe green stamps were great. Moral Fortitude says Montgomery Ward's catalog came way before the Sears catalog. That very well could be, but Montgomery Ward's must have done something wrong, or Sears must have done something right, because everyone remembers the Sears catalog. And but of course, Montgomery Ward's they're still around, aren't they? I think you still got them along with J.C. Penney. Their footprint isn't as big as it used to be. So Feral Kitty, I saw a giant stuffed giraffe in a grocery cart shortly after Toys R Us went out. I posted a photo with a caption about Jeffrey the giraffe now being homeless. Oh boy. Oh, Ray Brensicki. I remember the M&H 2-cent discount tickets that looked like small dollar bills, and you collected 100 of them, you could get about 6 gallons of gas. Gas stations did that too. I forgot about that. Carl's Corner says, I still have those booklets. Yeah. Elliot Polach says, do you think the Sears house can be assembled easier than a coffee table from IKEA? Now, here's the thing. I'll admit, I've never been to an IKEA. There are IKEA stores in Michigan, at least one that I know of. And I know people have gone there. And I've heard all the jokes about if you really want to test your relationship, go with your significant other to an IKEA and see how long you're still speaking to each other. That kind of thing. And then also the assembly problems. I've never bought anything from IKEA. I'm not familiar with IKEA, but I've heard the horror stories. But I can tell you that these bookshelves right here, not that one, but that one right there. I bought one of these bookshelves and I liked it a lot. So I wound up buying 1, 2, 3, 4. That'd be 5. 5 of those bookshelves. And every time I buy one, I get this big box. It weighs like 100 pounds. Put it on the floor, open it up, start, and 2 hours later, my fingers are all smashed up. I'm beside myself, and I go, okay, we're gonna wait. And I'd wait a couple weeks, and I order another one. I purposely did not order them all at the same time. Even though I got better at building them, it was no fun. It was no fun. And it's one of those things you assemble. They give you an Allen head wrench, and they gave you a screwdriver. In fact, I had it over. Oh, it's gone now. But I had it over here for the longest time. That had a reversible flathead or Phillips on it, and that was the 3 tools you needed to assemble this thing. So, yeah. Jeff Massey Finger Hut catalog had the diamond textured car seat covers and clear vinyl. Finger Hut. I just wondered, is that someone's name, or they just put 2 words together? Finger Hut. MH08 gas stations used to give out glasses as well. Sports teams. We got the moon glasses during Apollo. I gave away Detroit Lions glasses in the late 70s, early 80s. Honest to God, people said, don't want it. It's okay. Yeah, every fill up, you get a glass. That's okay. No, thanks. And then I remember they accidentally shipped us a case of Oakland Raiders glasses. And we'd go out and say, you get a free glass. And they go, I go, it's Oakland Raiders. Like, oh, that's cool. They didn't want the Lions glasses. I'm not making that up. Old Paint 71 says Montgomery Ward went out of business in 2001. There's an online retailer using the same name, but they didn't open until 2004, but they bought the trademark. So it's somebody else using the name and the marks, but it's not the exact same entity. Okay, it makes sense. I didn't think I'd heard of them recently. Of course, people used to call Monkey Ward, the same way they call JCPenney Jacques Panay. Don't know why. Devon Bound Canadian Tire Bucks. I've got some on my set. Canadian Tire, I guess, is just a Canadian thing. So I don't know much about them. I just know that they're everywhere, everywhere out there. They're ubiquitous in Canada. Foxy Thrani says, didn't Targets buy Montgomery Ward? I don't know who bought them. Jonathan Pretty, I came from Indiana wearing 1 license plate on my car to Maine, which requires 2 plates, got pulled over and did not write me a ticket, though he did everything to get me to say I was going to stay in Maine after college to establish residence. Oh, the promises we make at the roadside will get us out of a ticket. Oh, Fred Hoyt says a joke about saving cigarette coupons up to buy an iron lung. I forgot you could also save the coupons for your cigarette packs. Oh boy. Tigerman99515, I bought a piece of pizza at IKEA. I swear it was a piece of cardboard with ketchup on it. I'm surprised it didn't give you assembly instructions. M3 had to drag my 20-something son out of an IKEA. I know what I want. I got it. Between the meatballs and the thousands of miles we had to walk. I've also heard about the meatballs. Apparently, there's a thing with meatballs. Like they give away meatballs. They've somehow figured out that the free meatballs will keep people shopping longer or spending more. I'm not sure. Ryan Holtzinger, the Spiegel catalog, 60609. Wasn't that the one? You'd always see that at the end of the game shows, prizes were contributed by, among others, the Spiegel catalog, 60609. I think is that Chicago? I'm not sure. Doug Jones, I miss Radio Shack. Don't worry, they still got your zip code. I went into a Radio Shack. I may have told this story about 10 years ago now, but they still existed because I went into one. And I go into the Radio Shack, and the guy goes, "Yeah, can I help you?" And I go, "Yeah, I'm looking for." At the time, I had a forgot which phone I had at the time, but I had a phone that I used to wear when I was running. It clipped to my belt. And I said, "I've got this phone, and there's a jack that my earphones go into, and all I need is an elbow, so that the earphone jack goes into the elbow, and then that goes into the phone, and that way it turns this way, but it doesn't just stick straight out of the phone where it might get hit by something." Guy goes, "We haven't got those." Without even looking, now we've got those. And I'm like, "What?" And he's, No. I go, "Do you have a set of headphones that have an angular thing?" And he's, "No." I'm looking around, I'm like, "What do you guys do here?" Like, and they had stuff, but they had a big, I think it was AT&T, but they had a big cell phone counter. And they were trying to transition into just selling cell phones. And this I think is a marketing problem. What they should have been doing is going, look, Radio Shack as a niche gets people to come in who are looking for the oddball electronics things they can't get anywhere else. And so if some guy comes in and buys that weird little elbow connector, he might buy something else while he's in here. But you need the things to get people into the store in the first place. I'm not going to go to Radio Shack. I'm not going to go to Radio Shack to get a phone. It's the last place I think. Radio? No, it's a phone. And Shack. And I remember leaving the store going, I will never go back there again. And never did. So Doug Jones misses Radio Shack. I don't, but I'm just joking. Jeff N4POD. I worked at Radio Shack 3 different times. David Hastings. Do you remember Kresge? Of course. Kresge was the original dime store, or one of them. There's a couple. SS Kresge. And the funny part about Kresge's is that later on they developed Kmart. And in Troy, Michigan, not far from Somerset Mall on 16 Mile Road, also known as Big Beaver, there was a big building. It's gone now. They just tore it down, I believe. And it was the Kresge World Headquarters. Later, they renamed it the Kmart World Headquarters because Kmart overtook Kresge. And I remember it was also Woolworths was the other dime store. And you could go to Kresge's, and they had everything. They had a food counter, and they had ladies' goods and everything there. One of those all-purpose, we have everything stores. Lewis Browning went to Radio Shack for a floppy disk. All he had was flash drives. I love Scotch. As a kid, I spent hours in Rat Shack. You know what's funny is when you're a little kid and there's some store near your house, you just hang out there because it's near your house. Oh, Lowell Riggs I am. The last good thing Radio Shack did was the TRS-80. Sean M. is Kmart still, and I think they're all closed now, aren't they? I think they are. M3, there's still Sanders stores in Michigan. Fago. Well, Fago still exists. I don't know about Sanders stores. I think as a brand, it still exists. So, yeah, Foxy Thronius' Micro Center is better than Radio Shack. Yes. Doug Jones, got to run. See you next week. You too, my friend. Elliot says a phone is kind of radio. My favorite was always Dress Barn. Dress Barn. What genius. Let's just understand. The guy, it was a guy. No woman would have thought, I'm going to call a store the Dress Barn. So some guy is thinking, Dress Barn. Yeah, that makes sense. You got Radio Shack, Pizza Hut, Dress Barn. Because, women do tend to equate barns with high fashion, right? Dress Barn. G Vogue, hello from Albuquerque. Hello, my friend. Hey, Mark Henriksen's in the house. My good friend, remembering Martha Stewart and her Kmart stuff. And don't forget, didn't Kathy Ireland have stuff at Kmart also? Mark's a good friend of mine. I don't think he'll mind me saying this. He spent some time at Chrysler. And we spent many hours talking about Jeeps and Chryslers and so on. So, Carl's Corner later, Lehto. See you later. 182 Q KFTW says Shack is what ham radio operators call the room with all of their radios. The Radio Shack. Oh, actually, something. You're right. I should have known that. But it's one of those things that doesn't translate that well because the average person doesn't know that. Old Paint says there's 5 Kmarts left, 3 in the U.S. Virgin Islands, 1 in Florida, and 1 in Guam. Road trip. Of course, the only road trip the one in Florida. Paul Harris points that out as well. Moral fortitude. Anyone remember what customer service was? Miss those days. Oh, yeah. S. Thompson, the boot barn. The boot barn. Well, that makes a little more sense for boots, right? Dan Boyd says Dress Barn's getting you ready for the square dance. Lewis Browning got a shotgun from J.J. Newberry's 5 and dime. 5 and dime. Yeah, due to inflation, they got rid of the 5 because there was nothing you could buy for a 5-cent piece. You had to go straight up to the dime. Rules Crypto says, please give me advice if you have something constructional or constructive. I would need to know more about your situation. Oh, Fly Chomper says Jacqueline Smith did Kmart. The Jacqueline Smith collection. I believe they signed her up about 10 years after she was even mildly relevant. Oh, boy. Now, Ryan Holsinger is saying the last Kmart closed in October. Is that including the one in Guam? Zach says Shack should have bought Radio Shack. A man with a plan, a canal, Panama. Shaban says her name should be pronounced Siobhan. And I refuse to voice the B. Okay? I say Shaban. You say Siobhan? Of course, it's a fricative, not that it's voiced. But anyways, Duncan Campbell says they have Kmarts in Australia. Really? Do you remember what Rain Man had to say about Kmart? Is it Tom Cruise said to Rain Man? Kmart sucks. G Vogue. No, I'm sorry. The Canadian Robot Lady's not going to be in today. Manitoba Mr. says Radio Shack with a Q. Right there. Boom. Sean M. Do you remember Child World? No, was that like a store for little kids' clothing or something or what? Richard Terhune, full serve gas stations. I worked at one. I pumped gas, checked oil, put air in tires, changed light bulbs. You'd be amazed. It'd be pouring rain. All the pumps are open. And somebody pulls into the far pump and they've got their gas tank on the wrong side. You're like, I need $2. And you're like, I'm being set up, right? Like, you can't be a normal person. The blue light special, John Zablek. The blue light special was apparently a big thing. I always thought it was a joke. Like, in other words, it's something they just did. Apparently, it was like a huge corporate thing where it actually substantially would allow them to make money because some people, oh my gosh, I was there and I had a blue light special. Rules Crypto says my 6-year-old girl got injuries from 2 school bus employees. Now they won't serve justice. Well, if it happened in America, see, you have to remember, I don't know these things. If it happened in America, in one of the 50 states, if it happened in Michigan, I might be able to tell you somebody who can help you out. If you're not in Michigan, I would suggest you contact an attorney in your area and find out if they'd help you look into it. But again, I don't know much other than that brief sentence you told me there. Mark says Kmart in other countries is actually thriving. G. Vogue says you can't pump your own gas in New Jersey. And I believe it's also, is it Oregon? There's one other state that does it, I believe, but no one understands why. Blah, blah, blah. Attention, Kmart shoppers. Attention, Kmart shoppers. Ryan Holsinger says Rain Man needed to get his boxers from only the Kmart in Cincinnati. Kmart in Cincinnati. Jeff N4POD. My wife worked for Kmart back in the late 90s. There was a pretty big Kmart down the road. I mentioned I lived off of Maple Road. East, I'm guessing 3-4 miles over was a Kmart. It's gone now. But I remember going in there from time to time. But Art S says, nope, now it's only New Jersey. That's limited on the no self-serve. Dan Boyd, I'm going to drink a Mexican glass bottle of Coke right now, my friend. I'm jealous. Glass, Coke and glass tastes better than Coke and plastic all day long and twice on Sunday. Moral Fortitude says Cheryl Teagues was first at Kmart when his designer jeans were popular like Jordache and Sergio Valente. Like 1979 or something. Prodigal Stranger says, yeah, Oregon decided to let people pump their own gas. And I'm sorry, I overemphasized the wrong Oregon. Carl's Corner says you can't pump your gas because you're taking a job away from somebody. Well, yeah. And they also claim that there's a potential danger to it. I remember when I was pumping gas when I was in high school at a full service station, and then a self-serve came in over on Woodward Avenue about a mile away. My first thought was, how long till people are killing themselves? Because if you saw the people who used to come in and how badly they drove and they didn't know what side of the car the gas pump was on, the gas door was on. I mean, it was, I'm like, and I'm surprised that there weren't more problems. I really am. Florida Bart Fast. Yes, I knew where that's from. I remember being in Kmart one time and hearing Zach Wilde on the in-store radio. Oh, I was walking through Meijer the other day and I heard something really obscure. It wasn't Thomas Dolby, one of our submarines, but it was something close. I'm like, really? But at least it's a real version. It wasn't a Muzak version, so. Zach, did you pump gas in Michigan? Yes, I did. A little town called Birmingham, Michigan. I pumped gas and I drove a tow truck. I did not do mechanical work for money. I would work on my own car occasionally. I remember, for instance, I needed to change the starter in my Charger, my 69 Dodge Charger I had in high school. And I asked the boss, is it okay if after work today, if I don't mess anything up, can I pull my car in? And, yeah, go right ahead. Pull the car in, lift it up, drop the starter up, put the new starter in, boom, 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 put it back down, drive it off, But the tow truck was the fun part. That's where I got all the good stories from. So G. Vokes' beer is also much better in the glass. Well, I have to just trust you on that, my friend. Valerie Ann, I'm a Jersey girl. I don't pump gas. Zach says you're an uptown girl. Art S says New Jersey gas is still cheaper with full service than Pennsylvania or Michigan gas with full service. I wouldn't be surprised. Michigan in particular has got some pretty heavy road taxes slapped on there so that it doesn't matter. I mean, it's going to be expensive. Mark Miller, I heard Rush on the radio at the local grocery store. Stephen Cook with a V, have a great rest of the day. David Peterson, was the last time someone heard Jethro Tull on the radio? It's been a while. There's a classic rock station that I hear from time to time, but Jethro Tull did not make many of the station playlists where the playlist is shorter. So instead, you're going to hear Stairway to Heaven 16 times a day, but no Jethro Tull. That's just how it is. Tigerman 99515, got to go. Changing my oil today. Have fun. Oh, boy. The prodigal stranger says the only exception is motorcycles. They don't want to touch them. I remember pumping gas and the guy pulls into the motorcycle and he wants gas. And I would just hand because most of the time they'd rather do it themselves. And I don't want to risk dripping gas in some guy's gas tank. So I would hand him the gun and let him put the thing in and fill it up and hand it back to me. And I'd be like, cool. And I'd take his $3 or whatever it was. But Mark Miller says he heard a locomotive breath on locally here. Fatty McButterpants says it's about that time. Later, folks. John Zablek says classic rock is highly subjective. I remember when the first classic rock station signed on, it was a thing invented by Fred Jacobs, who's a radio consultant. He's the one who came up with the phrase classic rock and started programming stations around the country. And there was one in Los Angeles, one in Detroit, and a bunch of others. And when they first signed on, they started playing the stuff that was slightly out of the range of the modern album rock stations, but was familiar to people who listened to those album rock stations just a few years ago. And suddenly it caused a schism to where the album rock stations didn't want to play Led Zeppelin anymore because it was now being played in classic rock. But that happened in the mid-1980s. And so now think about how long ago the 80s was. And so classic rock had to move forward, but they want to hang on to these older stuff. And the same thing happened with oldies. When I was a little kid in the Detroit area, we had WHND, Honey Radio 56 AM. And they played oldies, but they played doo-wop and stuff from the 50s. And then I remember when there was an FM version of them and other oldie stations came along and they dumped the 50s stuff and they added more 60s and 70s stuff. And I think I've mentioned this before. I worked at a radio station in Saginaw in 1985. And at the oldies station, I played the Electric Light Orchestra's telephone line as an oldie. It was a record I'd bought as a young person. And I'm like, what? And it wasn't the newest thing in the studio either. So there's always these things about how classic the rock is, how old it is. And then, of course, then it starts getting to be such a big category, you can't do it. So Dan Boyd's album-oriented rock or solid rock was the greatest format ever. Art S, are you going to follow in Leno's footsteps and drive a steam train? I don't know if I'll ever have the opportunity to. MHO8, we had a station in Denver that played stuff from the 40s. It's tough to do that all day long. Carl's Corner, we are old, Steve. Mark Miller, it took me 4 days to hitchhike to Saginaw. Saginaw is one of those towns that pops up in the songs from time to time because it just has a certain poetic sound to it. So many syllables and so on. So there you go. Anyway, it is past 3 o'clock. We've somehow burned 2 hours of perfectly good Sunday. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a blast. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.